do from Moldova, and people have said that this gets too long. So after Belarus is over, if you want to stay from Moldova, I have about 20 minutes of pictures from Chisinau, the capital of Moldova. The thing the two countries have in common is that they were, as many other countries, were part of the Soviet bloc. And they, of course, became independent after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991. The economy in Belarus is doing pretty well. It's had its ups and downs. Moldova, however, is the poorest country in Europe, and by some standards, the most unhappy country. I couldn't see that from just seeing people, although you'll see that people look sort of grumpy. But Belarus is quite a nice country, as it turns out. So let me just say something by way of introduction. I was coming from Norway. In fact, next month I'm going to show pictures of the ship that I took up and down the Norwegian coast, the Hurtigruten.
Yeah.
So I got off that, went to Oslo to get my Aeroflot flight to Minsk. And I was there bright and early, first in line with my Belarus visa. And when they started boarding, they said, "You have to talk to the people at Aeroflot." So I cheerfully went over there, and they said, "Where is your Russian visa?" And I said, "Well, I only just have a layover there of less than 2 hours." They said, "Well, unless you have a visa, you cannot go to the Russian Federation." And they were absolutely implacable about it. And I was hysterical about it. So I stood in front of their booth and I cried for about 10 minutes. And I really didn't know what to do. So I emailed my guide, who was waiting for me in Minsk, and told her that I was either going to be delayed or I wasn't going to show up at all, that I would keep in touch. And it was very early in the morning, so I went down and had breakfast and calmed down. I thought, okay, I'm going to skip this part of the trip. I'm just going to go back home to San Diego. And I tried to even find flights, and I couldn't. So SAS is sort of in charge of the terminal there in Oslo. It was very busy. And I went to them and told them of my plight, that I was supposed to be in Minsk in the afternoon, and I couldn't figure out how to get there. So the solution was, excuse me, and there was a solution, to take Baltic Air. And I have to plug Baltic Air because they're a wonderful airline. They're very inexpensive, they're very accommodating, they have interesting routes. And I've taken them before, and so Baltic Air to Riga in Latvia, that's their base, and then spend overnight in Riga, and then take the next flight, take the next day flight to Minsk from Riga. Okay, so that was the plan. And I was staying all the way in some kind of motel on the outskirts of town, and went all the way back there, spent a sort of boring day. No, I didn't. I saw Oslo, that's right. Then flew to Riga, which is a wonderful city. I love Riga. Had a lovely time there. And then the next day flew to Minsk, finally. So I got there about 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, I don't know, noon or something in the morning. And somebody picked me up. That was good. And took me to a hotel. I'll show it to you. Very fancy hotel. But nowhere. It was absolutely nowhere. And they said, well, your guide will come tomorrow. And I had already missed one day of the trip. So I was very irate. And finally, I was able to call my guide and said, you know, I've only got a few more days left. Why not start the tour now? Because there's nothing for me to do out here. And finally, I made her agree. So then the tour was a little shorter than I thought. I wanted to see more of Belarus, but I saw quite a bit. So let me start talking about it. The music you heard actually was not, it was Eastern European music, which has its own unique flavor, as does the food. So Belarus is a pretty place. There it is. So it's in the middle of all these Eastern European countries, these Baltic countries that you know about. And this little part of Russia that's over here is Kaliningrad or someplace. But it is adjacent, of course, to Russia and very close to Chernobyl. I don't know that they had any problem with Chernobyl or not, I don't know. And very close to Ukraine. So all of these countries, of course, were in the Eastern Bloc of the Soviet Union. Some of them doing better now than others. And all sort of worrying about the effect of Russia being so close. So it's a landlocked country, as you can see, known for its Stalinist architecture, and we'll see some of that. I don't know that we're going to see grand fortifications, but there are primeval forests. A lot of the country is forested. The capital, of course, is Minsk. The KGB headquarters are in Minsk. We'll see those. And the Museum of the War is there. I didn't see that, but and several nice, very nice churches. So they have mostly Russians, Ukrainians, Jews, and Poles. There are a few Jews left. The president is Alexander Lukashenko. He's been president for 20 years. He's essentially a dictator. They have elections, but it doesn't mean anything because he gets, 99% of the vote. The currency is the Belarusian ruble, which of course is useless outside of Belarus. And the population of the country is about 10 million. I'm not sure it could be called a puppet state of Russia, but it's in a way more Soviet than Russia is now. So the area is about 20% larger than Washington State. And this is a little factoid that I think is interesting. It's the only country in Europe which retains capital punishment. Except, of course, the United States. And we're not in Europe. It's a progressive, and this is what Lonely Planet has to say about visiting Belarus. It's a progressive and modern place, quite at odds with its own reputation, which I don't know what you thought, but I thought it'd be sort of a dumpy place, sort of in the backwoods somewhere. It's not. There are cafes, restaurants, nightclubs. I didn't go to those. And sushi bars, I didn't see any of those. Galleries. And the city center is quite nice and remodeled to the taste of Stalin. There are a few Stalinist-type buildings. This church is a beautiful church. I'm not sure which one it is, but it's one of many very beautiful churches.
Did you take that picture?
Did I take that picture? No. No, I had to borrow some pictures from the internet. But I took this picture. This is Independence Square in the middle of town.
Do you know if this is what they call Belarus is beyond the pale?
I don't know what beyond the pale is, Celia. But I tell you, I have a lot of slides. So if you could save your questions, it might be better, because I'm going to go through these pretty fast. So it was called White Russia for a while. I remember on a train to Russia stopping in White Russia, but that was a long time ago. It's considered archaic and no longer in use, and considered to be offensive, because it creates a verbal link with Russia instead of establishing Belarus as having a separate national identity, and it does. Many of us have ancestors that came from the Minsk area. I might have, I don't know. It was generally people came from Russia, and Russia at that time covered different boundaries than it does now. And part of them may have included Minsk. So when the older texts refer to White Russia, may be referring to former parts of Belarus that are no longer included, which may be part of Lithuania, Latvia, Ukraine, or Poland. So this is independence in 1991. And that's when all those countries became independent, including Ukraine, which is slowly losing theirs. Belarus has the most harrowing history of any former Soviet country, with nearly a third of its population having perished during World War II. Minsk is the capital. This picture on this side, the left, is the Independence Square. And you'll notice there's a lot of empty space. There's a lot of green space. And on the other hand, there are a lot of buildings clumped together. I didn't bring my pointer, but if you see on the left, a whole bank of buildings that look like they have no space in between, that's probably the case. So there's this, well, not a paradox, but a lot of condos are built that way now, all very close together with a lot of green space. And that seems to be the floor plan, at least for Minsk. So there's almost 2 million people in the capital. And the central capital is a marvelous example of mid-20th century Soviet architecture, and you'll see some of that. For example, this is a painting, but you can see some of those old Soviet-style buildings, beautifully restored. I don't remember seeing those little figures on top, but as it happens, I got there something like July 1st, and it was the anniversary, it was their equivalent of July 4th. So there was a lot of festivities. That painting was part of the festivities going on. So 20% of the population, including most of the Jewish community, died during World War II. And some of that was due to Stalin. But they don't talk about that. They just talk about the Nazis and those killings. But about 1 million people died from Stalin. And yet they're very honor the Soviet heroes and their holidays. So this is Lukashenko, and he's ruled since 1994. And he's not a very democratic ruler. He is very repressive. There's political opposition which has been violently suppressed, so you don't see demonstrations in Belarus. I didn't see this. I didn't get to Brest, even though I had planned to before my trip was curtailed. But this is a monument to Soviet resistance against the Germans. So their economy is very much Soviet-style economy. Of course, Russia does not have that kind of economy anymore, a planned economy, where the industries are state-owned and operated, as well as the agriculture and state farms. But theirs seem to work better than the ones in Soviet Union. They take care of the price of food, they regulate that, and they lower the price of food so that it is accessible to the population. As this commentary says, it sometimes seems like an updated and idealized version of the old USSR, but without the Communist Party. It's not a communist party there. People can travel freely. Their poverty level is the lowest in the former Soviet sphere, which says quite a bit, because there's some very prosperous countries in the old Soviet sphere, and a very small gap between the richest and the poorest. So that's an accomplishment. The social protections remain largely intact. The population is guaranteed almost 100% employment. And a lot of the countries in the former Soviet bloc miss being in the USSR because they are facing serious unemployment and poverty. Here's a very moving memorial to the civilians that were murdered by the Nazis. So this is a high rate of growth. Their average salaries had reached $158 by 2004, which was nearly double their level. So they don't make a lot of money, but they are going upwards anyway. And in 2011, they had to devaluate their currency. So their sectors are service industry and manufacturing, and there seems to be a lot of agriculture. This has to do with the divisions of the country. That part of it was annexed to Poland, part became part of the Soviet Republic. There were a lot of Jewish people there. On the eve of World War II, more than 1 million Jews lived in this territory, which is maybe not the current boundaries of Belarus. And then the country was overrun first by the Red Army and then by the Germans, and more than 800,000 Jews were killed. Most at the hands of the Einsatz Group B in local actions. So a lot of local Minsk people killed Jews. And then one day, 5,000 Jews were killed in one day. So the underground is the Bielski partisans. Anybody ever heard of them? Yeah. Very interesting. Two brothers who started this movement to live in the forest. And 1,200 Jews there lived for a couple of years in the resistance and they survived. And in a minute I'll show you the movies and the books written about the Bielski brothers and their resistance. And this Holocaust monument is the pit in Minsk.
5,000.
So 5,000 Jews were murdered in this area
Oh, thank you.
on March 2nd, 1942. It's really quite remarkable. Although this text says that most of these monuments, which are all over the country, were erected by the local people in Belarus. Sometimes Jews went over there and erected the monuments themselves and found evidence of what had gone on there. This is the pit. So a lot of the area in Belarus is forested, so you can imagine that when the resistance people hung out, they had plenty of forest area to find, although their life was very difficult. So this is, there were episode of the History Channel on the Bielski brothers, which you can probably find, a book called Fugitives of the Forest, and the film Defiance. I remember seeing that. Anybody see that? That talks about the resistance of these people and their life in the forest during this period, which was very difficult. And then 2 BBC series on this extreme survival. So I think we know that, okay. This is another picture of the pit. These are monuments around Minsk and other places. This one says, "To the everlasting memory of the victims of the Holocaust." 700 Jews from this particular ghetto were brutally murdered here during the rising in June 1942. And it says this monument was erected through the efforts of the Belarusian Jewish community, and there is still a Jewish community there, and thanks to the Simon Mark Lazarus Foundation in the UK, another foundation in the USA, two family foundations in the USA. So I think these were not exactly spontaneous monuments that were put up by the Belarusian people, but they had the help of this money that came from the UK and the USA. This is the KGB building. I passed it several times. I really didn't know that it was the KGB building till afterwards. And if you read about the KGB activities in Minsk, they're constantly torturing people in the basement. Of course, when you're a tourist in a country, you don't know these things. You don't hear exactly screams as you pass by. Like tourists in our country don't realize that we have more people in prison than any other country in the world. All they see is nice buildings and eat nice food and see our freedom. So it's not surprising that one doesn't know this, but to have the KGB building in the middle of downtown is pretty surprising. So their democracy index was among the lowest in Europe until in 2014 when Russia surpassed it. So now Russia has one of the lowest democracy indexes. The country is labeled as not free by Freedom House and called repressed in the Index of Economic Freedom. This is not obvious when you go there. As you'll see, there's some very joyous pictures that I've taken. There are 24,000 village populated areas, small villages in Belarus. And although very few of the rural population live in farms, the majority have houses erected among the main roads throughout the country. So about 70% of the Belarusian population live in 104 towns and cities and 100 other urban creations. And you'll see, I found it a very clean country, a lot of green, and in the villages, some very pretty structures. There's no official religion. There's Eastern Orthodox Christianity, which that church is, of course, and then Roman Catholicism, which is much smaller. So both religions celebrate their holidays and their versions of Christmas and Easter as national holidays. surprised me. Belarusians are the biggest consumers of alcohol. In the little country Belarus, each person above the age of 16 drinks an average of 4.62 gallons of alcohol annually. Do I have a source for this? No, but it says so on the internet. It doesn't seem to me that people drink as much as they do in, for example, Georgia, where wine flows like water. So I didn't see any of this. I'm just quoting the data that I found on the internet. Take it or leave it. Here's some, what I'm wearing, of course, is not traditional dress, but this is traditional dress. There was some, as I said, this was a very festive time of the year that I was there, so there were a lot of festivals going on, and this was one of them. Here's another Orthodox church. Interesting architecture. I saw some of this in Siberia. So Russia is very well spoken, spoken very widely, and there is a big influence of Russia on Belarus. This is the interior of that window that you see there. It's a little town. This is again from Lonely Planet. There are good paved roads, clean streets, attractive parts, often adorned with floral displays, and smartly dressed people. You can see this woman is wearing a short skirt and shows a lot of skin. There's not a lot of repression there as far as people's drinking habits or wearing habits. The cars are fairly new. There's not a lot of them. A little piece from the church. Traditional Belarusian village houses are single-story wooden buildings with decorative exterior features like this one, sort of. Small gardens and usually some outbuildings for cattle. Other animals are log storage. It's not uncommon to see cows wandering from yards to the road. There they are. I didn't see that many of them, but there they are. More of these decorative houses. So this was June. Everything was in bloom. It was pretty hot. Here's some women not wearing traditional clothes. Red flannel shirt, actually. I think this was up for the holidays. So 2 languages. Although English was available. Some people did speak English. They're now teaching English as another language in the public schools. So kids are learning English, but have very little opportunity to use it. It's not a big tourist destination. In fact, it's hardly any tourists go there. The fruit and vegetables are fresh and probably mostly organic. I think this is a pharmacy, but if anybody can read Cyrillic, Jim, you can read Cyrillic. This is I traveled through Eastern Europe, and each country had its own version of Cyrillic, so when I thought I knew the alphabet, it turns out I didn't, but this is a little fair that was going on. And you can see the people look just like us. Well, not like us, those of us who are black and Hispanic and Asian. They don't look like those Americans. They look like white Caucasians, because that's what they are. These people. Food was pretty good, I have to say. And you see this too going on. So Mir Castle was a big attraction, about 90 minutes outside of Minsk. Very pretty, very well kept. I think that says, don't smoke here. I don't know what it says. This is some of the interior. This is how the country used to look, I guess, what the castle used to look. I think that's a hawk. People look just like us. I showed that already. All dressed in her Sunday best. See, even pink hair has come to Belarus. So 80% are ethnic Belarusians, with sizable minorities of Russian, Poles, and Ukrainians. guess Jews, I don't know. Anybody can read that? Catholic Church. Well, I'm not even sure it's a Catholic. So this was my hotel. This is where they took me when I first got there. You know, a very luxurious hotel, but absolutely nowhere except across the street is this nice park and this nice lake, which I'll show you in a minute. I'm not sure there were people in the hotel. This is another, I think, apartment house. It's a street that I was on. Streets are clean, green, well kept. The reason there's no traffic is because the traffic was roped off because the holiday was forthcoming and there was big festivities going on in the park.
Somebody grew grass.
So in the morning before my guide came, I could see these festivities were going on or getting ready to go on. So I walked over there and all this was happening. Unfortunately, I missed the big celebration because I was being taken around the countryside. This lake is very pretty. And the trees, you can see the grass is absolutely perfectly manicured. I think that says, "I love Minsk." And that's a rendering of Minsk. Now why it says Victory Park in English, I cannot tell you. It looks like they were going to have a lot of fun. Some sound effects, that's what it sounded like. Can you hear the people speaking Russian out there? So this is the interior of the castle. Some of these slides are a little bit out of order, but this is a picture taken from above some battle. Resisted. Those of you whose families came from Russia have family pictures that look something like that. I do. This was not a cheerful picture. This was during the Nazis. I have pictures like that too. It's a Jewish cemetery. So this is more pictures from the festivities across the street. Yeah, it looked pretty delicious. There was a police presence, but it didn't seem to be overwhelming. They seemed to be enjoying themselves. These big hats are characteristic of the cops in Eastern Europe. I don't know why.
Military.
Military, yes. Ice cream truck. Not sure what that says. So they were barbecuing kebabs. This is a picture of the lake. Shashlik, thank you. Nice fresh fruit. These traditional costumes. Look at all the magazines they have. Psychology Today. But even that, it's rated by far the worst country for press freedom in Europe. That's in the 2013-14 Press Freedom Index published by Reporters Without Borders, which ranks Belarus 157th out of 180 nations. So that's not good. Now this sign is in Russian, I think, and English. WC was nice, yes. Did you see that? That didn't allow for anything in between male and female, but still. Which I do think they have something between male and female, and I don't know how they are on homosexuality there in Belarus. They're certainly not friendly towards it in Russia, but you'll see later on that there seem to be some people who celebrated their bisexuality, I think.
Wow.
They were going to have a lot of fun. So 70% of Belarusian population lives in these urban areas. I would say these apartments are very nice. They have closed-in balconies and look expensive and not as tall as some of the others. But what astonished me is there's no space between them. I couldn't quite get over that, how they were all clumped together. Of course, around them is a green area. I didn't see any stores where you get your groceries, so I don't know how they manage, but on top of it like that, see. If you remember my slides from Kazakhstan, Astana, a lot of those buildings were all glued together like these. And I'm sure that's an economical way to build.
Yeah.
But it seems sort of claustrophobic. By the way, they do have a lot of casinos there, as they do a lot of places in Eastern Europe. Seems to be a revenue generating idea. Now here you can barely see any space between the buildings at all, and yet there's a lot of green space around the buildings. These buildings, these apartment houses, have these beautiful decorations on them. A big stadium. They're big on soccer there. And you can see the public transportation and the cars, pretty modern, and the bikes. So if you're driving a car, you'd better learn your Cyrillic. I think the sign on the left says Minsk. So there, if you want to start catching on to what stands for what. But the rest of it, I have no idea. But then I wasn't driving. There's another apartment building, beautifully decorated. In the old traditional style, by the way, of sort of Russian art. I guess these are electrical places. There's another version. Oh, I did take this picture of the KGB building. Except I'm not sure I knew it was the KGB building. So this is a different building. These are supposed to be sort of resurrections of Stalinist architecture that were built after the war destroyed most of the capital. This looks like a school, but I'm not sure. So my guide took me down to, there's a waterfront there with some ships, a lake, I guess. And down in this area is very pretty goings-on. And I actually ate at this restaurant. She went home and I ate there and took a taxi back to my hotel. Food was good. I'm not sure what this is advertising. I think a phone line or something. So these are part of the decorations for this festive holiday. I don't think it was independence from Russia that they were celebrating. That doesn't sound right. But I'm not sure what it was. When she finally came to my hotel and rescued me from this boring place, which even the restaurant was closed, and I said I was hungry, so she and my guide, the driver, took me to this series of little restaurants there on the street. She did show me an old synagogue on the street, but I don't know what happened to it, and the sculpture. So this is some very nice apartments, again, all clumped together in downtown Minsk. And again, there are lakes there and trees. And apparently Lee Harvey Oswald lived in Minsk for a while. It's a long story, which I didn't look up. At one time I knew why he was there.
Who is he?
He was the man who assassinated JFK.
Oh, my.
Yeah. And his Russian connections, he was married to a Russian woman. And he had Russian connections. And I forget why he was in Belarus studying something. It was a nice part of town that he lived in. Public art. Some pretty manhole covers are around the world. Nice fountain. I'm not sure what this building is, but it's very nice. Looks like an art museum. This is Independence Square, and it's surrounded by these, I guess, traditionally Soviet buildings, one of which is a very fancy hotel. And underground here is a big shop, not a big shopping center, but a sizable shopping center. Here's downtown Minsk. Not to be outdone.
That isn't in Cyrillic.
So there's my guide. I can't remember her name, but she was very nice. She didn't know I was Jewish, but she showed me a lot of the Jewish monuments. And she said, while we were walking around, she said, my husband suggests that you might want to go to the symphony tonight. And I said, oh, sure, I will do that. She said, just take a taxi and tell them where you want to go. So I did that, and you'll see some pictures from that. Actually, turned out to be a highlight of my trip. This is on Independence Square, a very nice church. Interior of it. Here I am on Independence Square. And again, these, if that's any tribute to the Soviet architecture, these boring Soviet blocks of office buildings. Not very ornate at all. But this is. Oh, this is the same restaurant from a different point of view. Pectopause. And this beautiful statue of this horse and carriage kids enjoyed playing with. This is the fancy hotel. I could have stayed down there, which would have been a lot more interesting, but also a lot more expensive.
This concert hall.
It does say concert hall. It's not the concert hall I think I went to, but anyway, this is the interior of that hotel. It's the interior of my hotel, I think. This is their restaurant. This is the breakfast room. Got a nice, interesting Eastern European breakfast. Quite wonderful. Oh, this is where they first took me for my first meal. Very nice down there. This is the menu. So you sort of have to point to something and hope for the best, which is a good way to eat around the world because you never understand the menu anyway. That's what I got. I think it was good. I think that's sour cream on top. So this is some downtown areas. This is the currency, which of course is useless, taken out of the country. As I said, there are a lot of casinos there, and my hotel had a casino. Anybody know what that is? I don't know.
Minsk.
Cinema? Minsk what?
The first word.
The first word is Minsk.
Minsk.
That's right. So if you're a cryptogram doer, you can figure out the rest of the alphabet from that, I think. It's not that I didn't have the Cyrillic alphabet with me, I did, but I just, my brain got tired of figuring it out. Here's people going to the opera, I think. Not to the opera, but to the opera house. This is downtown Minsk.
Not too many people.
So this is where I went. I think it's the opera house, but it was the symphony I went to see.
Who was playing?
In a minute you'll see. If you can figure it out, I have no idea. The Minsk Symphony, I suppose. People were very well dressed. So I went in without a ticket. My guide said, don't worry about a ticket. So when I got to the door there, I said in English, you know, I'm an American tourist. Oh, and they welcomed me and they escorted me in and said, you know, I had about a half an hour before the concert started. So they stuck me in the lobby somewhere and they left, but they were very hospitable. So this is who was conducting, if that helps. And I think it was the Minsk Symphony, I'm assuming. So this is one of the women I saw in the lobby. And I guess it was very fashionable when you go to an opera or the symphony to wear your military uniform and all your medals. She looks like she was a top sergeant at least, or maybe the major general, I don't know.
I'd like to be under her.
Look at all those medals. This is the, when I got inside, I had the same story. I didn't have a ticket, and the usher said, sit anywhere, sit anywhere. Treated with anywhere. I had to find a seat that wasn't occupied, but they didn't require a ticket of me, and they treated me with great deference and respect.
They'd still be looking for you.
No, I don't think it was a crime or anything. The way they treated me was really wonderful. So while I was waiting out in the lobby, I noticed another general with his badges, and apparently with his son. And I was staring at him, and I guess maybe he was staring at me. So the son came over and invited me to join them. So I did.
Why not?
So the general, he was actually, one of these medals was the Battle of Stalingrad, which was pretty grim. He survived. But his son did speak a little English and introduced me to his father. That was a highlight, I have to say. That was a biggie.
Great picture.
Here's some of his medals. This is the programmer, or something like the program, in the orchestra. And apparently there's an organ in there, as you can see from the organ pipes. And this is what Belarusian people look like. All sorts of people, Caucasian, but red-haired.
Viking.
A singer like me. Conductors seemed very good. So what the program was very interesting. Instead of playing like Tchaikovsky's Fourth, they would play maybe the opening movement, or one movement of it, or 10 minutes of a piece. So what they did in the first half, before the intermission, they must have played 20 different classical pieces or parts thereof, which meant that the orchestra had to work, I thought, very hard, going from piece to piece. I thought they did a creditable job. And this guest pianist also did the same thing. That's what the, so like, I was in Chicago last weekend, went down to the Shell down there, Millennium Park, and heard Haydn's 52nd Symphony or something like that. And then Bruckner's Symphony. That's not how they do it here. So they just do little excerpts, which is sort of interesting, does keep your attention. Singer. Oh, okay, I'm skipping now to a completely different day. This was about 2 days later. And this was the day after the big celebration, but they were still celebrating. So my guide took me downtown, and we spent a little time in Independence Square. She actually left me in Independence Square to go shopping. But before that, we had lunch on the street. We had a very nice lunch. And on the street, there's an art school there, art and music school. And all this dancing and everything, singing and everything was going on there. It was amazing. People in costumes. When I said I thought there was some tolerance for bisexuality or, you know, mixed gender identity and everything, this guy, for example, was dressed as a bride. This woman on the right seemed to be going somewhere, but he started talking to her. The woman on the left, or if she is a woman, has this huge mask on. This was going on right in front of our table. This was down there. She was some kind of a dancer.
What?
I don't know what's going on here, or at least if I did know, I don't remember. But they were having a lot of fun there, whether they were drunk or not, I don't think so. But the school was right across the street, so a lot of these were actors and musicians and artists. We were sitting right here, having a delicious lunch. Bikers were going by. It was a very festive atmosphere. Oh, so, as I said, there's an underground shopping center, and of course it was very hot out, so that was another incentive to go underground, which was a little cooler, not much. So a lot of things for sale down there. I guess I had the currency so I could buy things, because I don't think they took credit cards. I don't think I did buy anything. But I was looking for ice cream. I did find some, finally. But that's what it looked like, very nice. These little Russian dolls within dolls. I think the middle guy must be Lukashenko in his younger years. Chairman Mao, of course. Another church, or the same church. So this is a store of t-shirts. And here's a guy. I'm not sure if that's how much fun there is attached to this, but it doesn't say much for their perception of Russian tourists. I know in other Eastern European countries they do not like Russians, especially they don't like ethnic Russians who live in that country, like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And I'm not sure what the attitude is there. And I think all the tourists that I saw were probably Russian tourists, certainly not American, not Western tourists. Here's another view of the shops. View of the upstairs, where I finally discovered ice cream. Oh, this is another part of the dancing spectacular. Well, here, back to that again. I don't know whether these are actors or what was going on here. This blonde woman came to our table and sang a few songs. This guy in the white suit, not Alec Guinness, but was all decorated, having a lot of fun. Pizza place, right there on the right. Sorry, these skip around. So another thing she took us to was a fair in the village about 30 miles outside of Belarus, outside of Minsk. And there was dancing going on here too, and horse and carriage rides. Looks like something out of Norway. No. And lots of stalls set up where you can buy stuff.
Совершение нашего изделия. Видите, оно постоянно меняет свое очертание. И в этом процессе самое главное, что, как вы думаете? Осторожность это хорошо, но в другом процессе. В этом остановиться вовремя надо. Поэтому заканчиваем с вами.
So there was a group of people. I think this was all related to this holiday, but I think this fair goes on all year round, probably. There's a lot of stuff going on there.
Almost Mexican.
Mexican, yes, sort of looks Mexican. This is the interesting thing about folk art, how common it is between countries that are widely separated. Here's a horse that's very decked out. Or a donkey, I'm not sure which. So we had a lot of dancing at this place. And parades.
Народам Европы свободу принес яркий солнечный май. На площади Лены спасенной собрался народ старина. Достали гранной бить по скорбу, вальс играл на солдат. Но немедленно помнят времена. Отцы и болюси огнева. Мир имелся в согласе, Калгана. Помни сердце, не забудет никогда. Приходят цельный свет, солдатский вальсет отвечал.
These are just kids. I think they are in a dancing school. They were very good. And a little parade. I'm not sure what was going on here. Well, obviously she's praying. Looks Mexican too, doesn't it? South American. It's the airport. Okay, I think that's the end of the Belarus slides. I got them all in some decent amount of time. So I don't have as many slides from Moldova. I don't even know that much about Moldova. But if you want to stay, or leave, or whatever, let's try it. Oh, I don't think this says come again, but they don't seem quite as cheerful or as wealthy. So, it is an Eastern European country, former Soviet republic, terrain encompassing forest, hills, and vineyards. It shares, so it was part of Romania. It's geographically a very different place than Belarus is. There's Moldavia, which is part of Romania, and which I didn't get to, and Moldova, which is a separate country. And the reason I wanted to show you what little I know about Moldova is because there have been rumors that Russian troops are circling Moldova and thinking about possibly occupying it. I'm not sure why, because it doesn't have that many assets. Well, it has wine-producing places. And it's a pretty country, I thought, the little I saw of it. There's a happiness index that somebody developed in Sweden, and they ranked Moldova as the least happy country. I was sort of shocked at that, and I've talked to other people who spent time in Chisinau, the capital, and they found it very pleasant. I found it very pleasant, although the people seemed a little grumpy, but I didn't. But anyway, it's the poorest country in Eastern Europe, and they do have the threat of Russian invasion, which maybe they would welcome, actually. So there's almost 4 million people. It's not a very large country. And they have their own currency also, of course, worthless. So there it is, sandwiched in between Romania, which is the major influence, and Ukraine. I came there, I think, from Ukraine, or I left there from Ukraine. No, I went down. I can't remember how I got there. It was a different trip, totally, than Belarus. The border from wherever I came from was so beautiful with all these roses planted, I couldn't believe it. It took a long time to cross the border, it was bureaucratic, but it was beautiful. So in Chisinau, it's a very leafy city. It's got pretty streets with lots of trees and interesting architecture. It's also, I think, Eastern Orthodox. And of course, all these religions have come back. So after the Soviet Union, which was sort of eradicated all religions, a lot of religions came back. So I'm just going to tell you this story. I took the train. I was actually twice in Moldova. I took the train out of Moldova to Romania, and it was an overnight sleeper. And my roommate was a young, pretty woman who was a Moldovan. She was going to Bucharest to see her sister, who had left Moldova. And I met her, a child, was 1-year-old child, and her husband who had come to see her off. And her English was very good. And she told me that she was a Moonie, you know, the Korean guy, South Korean guy, Sun Moon, whatever his name is. And she said that after the Soviet Union left, there was a vacuum, a spiritual vacuum. And a lot of the evangelical religions moved in. So a lot of people belonged to a lot of these other religions. And also Sun Moon Yun, whatever his name was, moved in. And she knew that he arranged marriages. You know, that they would have a ceremony where maybe 100 couples would get married at the same time. And her parents were not happily married, and she thought if he arranged her marriage, she would be better off. So she was married to, I think, a Latvian, and they had trouble communicating because they didn't speak the same language. But, and she said it wasn't a great marriage, but he looked like a nice young man. And the kid was born, and so she's a Mooney. And she actually, I think, worked for the Mooney Church, or whatever they call it, to get more Moonies and arrange Mooney celebrations and arrange Mooney worships. Very nice young woman. Sorry, I don't have a picture of her. So I'm just mentioning this because religion, of course, has come back to all those former Soviet places. Some of which are Muslim. These are not. These are Christian. People playing chess like it. But this is an example of the street. This is not dirt here. These are leaves. Well, it's not the cleanest place I've ever been, but it's not dirt on the streets. There's cars. There's these substantial-looking European buildings and cultural places. And shops carrying mostly Russian stuff. I thought it was very pretty down there. So I went to a market which carried delicious looking food, but I don't have, for any reason, some reason, pictures of smiling people selling you stuff. They all looked grumpy, they all seemed grumpy. But that's true of the Soviet Union too. You know, I think McDonald's was the first restaurant to come to the Soviet Union from outside the Soviet Union, and they had to teach their people how to smile and say good morning and thank you and please, you know, because the Russians were not accustomed to being pleasant to people, and these people were not too pleasant. Although the food was good, fresh. I thought the women looked cheap. But that's true of a lot of Russian women too, and Ukrainian women. So if you can get over looking at the cheeses, you take a look at these women.
Nobody smiles.
Not in this place. I don't, no. This is, after I went to the market, of course, I developed quite an appetite. So I found a little cafeteria. So this is a young woman serving me. Food was good. But she didn't smile either. Neither did she. But she was having yummy stuffed cabbages there, you can see. She was eating linses or something. Sour cream. All those dishes of my youth from a Russian background. Somewhere there was a train that looked like fun. So I spent a lot of time sitting in the park. There was a big park in the middle of Chisinau with a water fountain and people going back and forth and a church on each side. And shady. It was pretty hot there, which I enjoyed this sitting in the park a lot. They seem to be enjoying it. There it is. I think that's another statue to the Russian army. I don't think he's playing a mandolin. I think he's holding a bayonet.
Kalashnikov.
Huh?
Kalashnikov.
A Kalashnikov. Ah, yes. We have a lot of those in our country too, don't we? Oh, back to her again now. These guys are not smiling either. One looks sort of desperate. I think the unemployment rate is pretty high there. Oops, sorry. Oops, that's it. So, that's it.